This is wonderful.
So I guess you can see the names. I guess not. Can I? No? Oh, there were quite a few participants there.
Yeah, triple digits.
Yeah. Oh, wow, it's Cara. Cara's there somewhere. I just saw a little chat message come up from her.
Yeah.
No,
Hey, Cara. Long
That's the thing.
time no see. I did an event with Cara yesterday evening.
All right. So I think good to get started, everyone. You guys feeling good? Feeling ready?
Yeah.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. I'm Steven from Soho Press. Welcome to the Getaway Live author event featuring Jacqueline Winspear and Sujata Massey and the wonderful Juliet Grames. I want to send our warmest regards to all of you out there and hope you're staying safe and healthy. And I'm very happy that you can join us tonight. So before I pass it over to the stars of the evening, I just want to let you know that even if you are muted, you're in no way silenced. Please feel free to use the chat function to type out any questions that you may have, or let us know of any conversation topics you'd like to hear more about. My colleague and I will be monitoring that chat and filtering questions to the speakers while they're in conversation. And there'll probably be a more traditional Q&A at the end. We'll see how it goes. So without further ado, I will pass it to our wonderful moderator of this evening, Senior Vice President and Editorial Director of Soho Crime, Juliet Grames.
Thank you, Stephen. So I have to say Wednesday is becoming my new favorite night of the week because this is my second Getaway Live that I've gotten to moderate. And these are all crime fiction writers that I've had the very, very great privilege of editing myself. So I've always worked with them one-on-one, and basically forcing them to interact with one another when they're so delightful, it gives me such great joy. So tonight here, we have Sujata Massey, with whom, I should say, 2020 has been very difficult for all of us, but I have been able to edit a book by each of them this year. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful highlight during this time. Thank you both for being such classy, wonderful, witty writers. Incredibly embracing and warm, affectionate views on history, and you've both taught me so much. So I'm going to give a little bio for each, but Sujata I've worked with on 3 books now in her Perveen Mistry series, which we at Soho are very honored to publish. The first book is called The Widows of Malabar Hill. It's a really good starting point, and it is set in 1920 in Bombay. Mumbai now, but at the time it was Bombay, and it is about a young female solicitor, one of India's only practicing female lawyers, and she solves mysteries for women who can't represent themselves. It is terrific, award-winning, and now we're on the 3rd book in the series, and we're just so honored to have Sujata at Soho to publish with us. She has been writing for a long time before that, though. She also is the author of the Rei Shimura series, and I think there are 16 books, Sujata, is that right?
No, they're like 11 of those Rei mysteries, okay. But in general, you're right that I have about 16 books published, if we count everything else in India, and so you're a numbers lady. You got those numbers in your head.
An imperfect numbers lady. I like to make numbers up, but I will say that basically once you discovered the 2 wonderful books and 1 forthcoming book in the Perveen Mistry series, you have a lot more of Sujata to enjoy even after that. So, and then we have Jacqueline Winspear, who is the New York Times bestselling author of the Maisie Dobbs series, as well as a standalone novel called The Care and Management of Lies. And Maisie Dobbs is just, I mean, this is, Jackie is a household name. We all know how wonderful Maisie is. This World War I inspired series about a female psychologist, as she defines herself, who in the era between the 2 wars basically gets involved as a detective in order to kind of investigate mysteries that are born out of the war and wartime era stories. And then also Care and Management of Lies, which is a wonderful, wonderful book about World War I in the English countryside and food management. It's fantastic. But Jackie has been publishing the Maisie Dobbs series now for, is it 14 books, Jackie?
It's no, actually it's 15. I'm just working on number 16, and I've got obviously the care and management of lies. Huh?
But so after 16 books later, Jackie is actually returning to Soho Press, who published the first 2 Maisie Dobbs books.
That's right.
Which is really exciting for us. It's always been, we are so proud to have those books, Maisie Dobbs and Birds of a Feather. But this coming November, we are publishing Jackie's memoir. You hear me correctly? She's telling us all of her secret family histories and how they come to bear on her writing, and her fascinating childhood in the Kent countryside, growing up on a hops farm, and about her parents who lived with Romany travelers when they first got married. I mean, it's an incredible story that we feel just so fortunate to be publishing this November. So these are my 2 ladies. Did I miss any bio details that we should get in there first?
Not at all.
I think you did pretty well there.
Yeah.
The thing is that I could tell you the awards that they've won, except the list would take the entire hour. So I'm just going to cut it short. But they're both just such wonderful writers and wonderful, interesting human beings. And I have enjoyed their friendship during this great privilege of being able to edit them, each of them in a different way. And it's a dream come true to bring them together tonight. I couldn't believe I learned just a minute ago that they've never met before.
Yeah. I've been such an admirer, though, of Jackie for so many years. I remember when Maisie Dobbs came out and you just racked up all those awards for it. I could see exactly why. And, I kind of think of you as the queen of what we're trying to do. Right? The historical mysteries that actually connect to the real world of that time. They're not just about an elite. They're not just about playing games. They're looking at society then just as it is now.
Well, thank you very much, Sujata. And what I think, we have in common is a desire, because, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Sujata. So I've got a little bit of, as they say, form in this area. But the fact that you wanted so much to write about a certain time of place and bring the richness, because it's changed, places change. And the way you wrote to me about the change in places that you loved in India from when you first went there as a visitor in childhood, and then you went back again in later years, and a lot of the charm was gone, and for things that you missed. And I found that that really spoke to me. And I think that's, something that it drives me. It's a different time and place, and looking at how just the certain aspects of character as well that have developed over the years. But I think it's time and place. So I take my hat off to you, because having read your work, I can see that your love of place writ large there, and time and place. Yeah,
we're twins separated at birth.
Yeah,
I think it's true, though. I mean, in at least one chapter of your writing careers, you both are writing about the 20s and about strong female characters, and you both have such meticulous eyes for historical details. And Jackie, to your point about place and character and the connection there, I really think it's your attention to detail, both of you, that allows you to create such beautiful, realistic characters, even though it is such a different time and place. Mm-hmm. I think you do have a lot in common. So I'm glad to bring you together. Can I go ahead with my first question?
Sure.
I was wondering, for each of you, is there a particular thing that has brought you joy during these recent weeks of quarantine? Because I'm familiar with your social media feeds, and I'm just amazed by the things that you guys seem to be doing in your daily lives. So what's share with us? Is there anything we can do?
Sujata, do you want to take that one?
I'm a little bit embarrassed about it. I would say it's the miracle of flour. And once I got flour and started playing with flour, and I just can't tell you how much flour I've bought over the last 9 weeks. and the care with the flour and the sourdough starter and all the pizza crust and my most looked at website, as much as the New York Times, it's also the King Arthur Flour website. I'm making a pizza for dinner tonight with my leftover sourdough starter. And, I laugh about it, but it's like a feeling of control, I think, to be able to make something from nothing, to be able to take care of my family. And, sometimes it's just easier to create with my hands in that bowl than it is on the laptop.
Sorry, I was going to say there's a writer called Judith Dirk, I think it's D-U-E-R-K, and many years ago she wrote a book called A Circle of Stones, trying to remember everything about it, but she writes about this wonderful, almost spiritual, emotional experience of baking. And she would actually say in her work, how would it feel if, and she describes the whole business of baking bread and leaving, the dough on the windowsill in the warmth to prove, which is what they call that part where the yeast is rising and so on. And she writes about, I think baking is very therapeutic because I've been doing it too. And it's
what are you baking,
well,
Jackie?
I'm one of these people that I have to have gluten-free food, and there's a couple of ladies on the street, and we get together for our social distancing afternoon tea every Sunday, and so we're good at least 6 feet apart. But I have been bound and determined to try and get English style scones out of gluten-free flour, and I'm on my 3rd different type of gluten-free flour now, and the other 2, it wasn't quite what I remembered, but I know you can do it, and I've now got a different type of flour, and I really want English style scones because they're different. They're not American scones, and
they're round. Correct? They're round.
Yes, they're round, but the texture is different. They're more of a thick, sweet pastry with currants in, or sometimes people put cheese in it if you want it savory, but you split them and then you serve them with clotted cream and jam. You might know that because of course you spent some years in Britain.
Yeah, I grew up with that because my family, because we lived the part of England we lived in, we always said scones.
Well, where did you live?
Well, Newcastle upon Tyne.
Yeah, scones.
So that is exactly the scones that we made. They always had the currants. There was always jam. We didn't have the clotted cream until I visited Australia, of all places. That was the first place I had that. Yeah. But I love to make them. Yeah. And I make them with cream, and I'm, fortunate I can use all-purpose flour.
I know, that's great. Yeah. So baking, there you go. I think the whole world has been getting into baking, actually.
Jackie, I wish we had a scone for everyone on this call. Like, how many do we have? 114 people. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could send a virtual scone or scone to everyone?
Scone, whatever. It amounts to the same thing.
Maybe we can send a virtual recipe. We can find a really good one. Have you made scones from King Arthur flour yet, Sujata?
No, because I don't even have that flour anymore. That flour is no longer in my wheel. I use the recipe. I actually have some many recipes for it, scones.
And Jackie, can you tell us, or is it still a secret, what is the flour that has gotten the closest thus far in your experimentation, or have none of them passed muster?
Well, there's still one that one of my friends is recommending, and this is like an advertisement actually, because and it's called Cup for Cup, and I haven't tried it yet. And I've also tried. I sometimes mix my own flour, so to speak. So I'll get different blends of almond flour and cassava flour and so on and so forth, and throw in rice flour and see if I can get a blend that really works. But I figure if Marks and Spencer in Britain can do really good scones, then so can I. And when I come back from the UK, and one wonders if one will ever get there again, but I always come back with packets of them in my suitcase. Half my suitcase is gluten-free food from the UK because it's so good.
Well, if you find the perfect recipe, you should either copyright it and sell it for a lot of money, or you should share it with us.
Yeah.
So baking, that's wonderful. That's creative. Are you writing?
Am I writing? Oh yes, yes, I'm absolutely writing. You know, this is what I do. So yes, I'm currently working on the next Maisie Dobbs novel.
Oh,
And yeah, so that's coming out March next year. So I've just been working on working along that. Yes, you can tell I'm dancing around that subject.
Well,
so
we're both writers who work at home, right? So this
Yeah.
this shouldn't be harder. This whole stay at home, we should be doing the same thing as ever. But for me, it's different. Like the
You
first
know
thing
what it is? It's really funny because it's Sujata. I think you're right. I complained to someone the other day that nothing should have changed for me, you know, except that, you know, obviously there are things that none of us can do. But I work from home. I'm used to this. And yet, here's what I think it was. I always had a certain rhythm to my day. And the rhythm to my day was that I start work in the morning and I write for about 4 or 5 hours. And then I need a break. And my break is, you know, I go ride my horse because I train in the equestrian sport of dressage about 4 days a week. And so I go and ride my horse, or anyway, I'm away from, I'm outside, which is a great break for me because I'm actually thinking all the time, you know, and then I come back again and I do some more work, you know, usually my admin. And because I couldn't go to ride my horse because the ranch was closed, it threw off my schedule altogether. And instead I was going for these mega hikes in the afternoon just to get out. But what was so funny is I was finding it harder to write during that time. Well, about 2 weeks ago, the ranch opened again. So boom, I was straight out there to see Calvin. That's my horse. And I came back and I happened to say to my husband, you know, a couple of days later, oh, my writing's going so much better now. And he said, that's because you're riding again. He said, you've been out on your horse. And it really, I think it was that the rhythm of my day was getting back to the way I like it. And I know a couple of other writers like you that said the same thing. It's just really different, you know. So I'm just wondering how it was different for you, though.
Yeah, well, one of the first things I do in the morning, I call provisioning, which is I figure out what I don't have and what I need. And I haven't been in a grocery store for about 9 weeks. So the only way I get these things is through these curbside pickups at restaurants that are turning into general stores. And a lot of these websites, they're only open like during 1 hour. So I rush onto that website to see if I can get a pound of butter, and maybe I can get scallops, maybe I can get you know, so it's like I distract myself with, well, I've got to go and make sure I've got groceries. So that's my first problem. And then, yeah, then I do meander into writing, but I think it might also be because I have more people at home that are, you know, that their breakfasts and, you know, things like that. So I feel like I've almost become more of a homemaker than I used to be. So that is part of my morning, and that gets me off to a little bit later start. But like you, I like to write in the morning, and I like to exercise in the middle of the afternoon, you know, where we're in midday, you know, I like to do that. And today I went for a very long walk, and I love doing that.
Yeah, walking is good to get the mind moving. Yeah, gets the words going.
I'm glad you're both being so productive. That's good news for me. I'm really happy. But I do want to ask you, this is a question that comes up most often in events I've seen you both do. So I want to pose it here to clear the air for everyone. And it is, yeah, here we go. I have found that many writers I've worked with complain that their fictional protagonists are often taken to have been drawn from their own biographies. Basically, readers confuse the author with the protagonist. Is this something that happens to you? And if so, tell us a little bit about some of your stories there.
I guess I do have a story along those lines, because I am not my protagonist, you know, that's why I create other characters to goad her a bit, but I'm absolutely not my protagonist. But I was at an event, it was a literary event, it was down in Southern California, and I think I'd written probably 2 or 3 books at that point. And I wanted to use the ladies' room. So off I went to the ladies' room. There's a great long line, but it was a very, very posh area. So there was this kind of little sitting room, and then, you know, you went through to the rest of it. And so I'm standing there, and I could see this sofa, and there was a coffee table. And on the coffee table, someone had left a newspaper open. And you could see this massive advertisement that there were the Rolling Stones in concert. And I thought, oh my goodness. And I reached over, grabbed the paper. And, you know, one thing my brother and I have in common, we are big Rolling Stones fans. And I'm looking at it, and, you know, I thought, oh yeah, right. So I quickly got out my phone, and like this, I said, John, I said, Rolling Stones, November 4th, Anaheim. Are you in? And I could, yes, I'm in. I said, okay, I'll get the tickets. I snapped my phone, and suddenly I was aware the whole line was looking at me. And suddenly one woman said, well, I would hardly have thought the creator of Maisie Dobbs was a Rolling Stones fan. And it was just like, what am I supposed to do? Wear a leather jacket? And do you think I'm going to wear a cloche hat all the time and a little sort of 1920s outfit? But, you know.
Jackie, my favorite part about this story is as you were telling it, I think your accent became more British when you were impersonating
it probably did. I think it did, because that's how I heard it, you know, this almost haughty sound that's... I would hardly have thought that the creator of Maisie Dobbs, like, oh, well, you know.
I mean, I'm frankly astounded you didn't wear your leather jacket today.
Yeah, well, another time perhaps.
What about you, Sujata? Has that ever happened to you?
Well, I pick people with these big differences, and I think it's because when I create people with these big differences, I have such a specialized biography. I've got an Indian father, a German mother. I was born in Britain, but lived mostly here. I can't possibly do anybody like that. So fortunately, you know, so the first character I wrote was a Japanese American woman. And I was really interested in having somebody, it was important to me that somebody was bicultural. And because I had a lot of thoughts about that, especially what it's like to have an Asian dad and a, you know, European or Western mom, which is not the stereotype. So I did somebody like that. And now the thing that I'm doing now with the Perveen Mistry series is I write about a young woman lawyer, and I've never studied law, and she is of the Zoroastrian religion. And that is not a religion that was, I don't think that there's anybody in my family tree with that. My father's family stretches back for thousands of years, Hindus. And, you know, my mother comes from a German Catholic background. I do say one thing that we do share, I think, is we're, you know, part of India, but a little bit on the outside. You know, we're a minority. You know, if I had grown up in India, I would have probably been regarded as an Anglo-Indian, and they have a specific place in the society, and it's different. And in some ways, it's nice to be in a minority group in a country with very powerful religions, because nobody really has a big vendetta against you. You're not part of, you know, two or three groups that have these long simmering histories. But at the same time, people don't quite trust you necessarily. So it's an interesting place to be. And, you know, being this kind of like a mixed Indian background, writing about somebody whose ancestors actually came from Persia, and that nobody forgets that. And they maintain these special traditions. Just like I'm sure that if I were growing up in India, we would have been having scones for tea. Just like, you know, they have special foods and do special things at their weddings.
That was one of the things about Satapur Moonstone, which is the second Perveen Mistry, that fascinated me. I didn't know about Anglo-Indians or the separate caste that they kind of lived in. There's an Anglo-Indian character there. And then also about, you get into, there is a mixed religious couple where each member of the marriage is from a different faith. And they have a complicated situation because neither of their families really accepts them, and they've decided to go their own way. But it was really fascinating to learn about all of those intricacies, because a minority in India is actually a very large group of people. So there's so many people, stories that you can interact with during this time period. It's fascinating. So Jackie, will you go ahead and spill the beans a little bit about the memoir? Can you tell us a little bit about what we will learn about you from the memoir, besides the fact that you're a Rolling Stones fan?
Yeah, I've also got a Mick Jagger story in the memoir. It's a very different thing writing a memoir. And one of the things that I personally have wanted to do for years was to tell my parents' story, and very much their story as a young married couple who wanted so much to leave war, the bomb sites of war of London. I mean, it was really hard to get a place to live for anybody, because so much housing had been decimated during, the years of wartime. And so they were married towards the end of the 40s, and getting very, very distressed about not being able to find a place to live. Well, my mother was definitely getting distressed about it because she was living with her in-laws and she didn't particularly enjoy that. And then one day they saw this advertisement for a gypsy caravan, and they decided to buy it. Well, they borrowed the money to buy it, and off they went to Kent, which my dad knew very well. And even though it's the area that they went to was only about 80 miles south of London, it might as well have been another planet. There wasn't the availability. Not everybody had a car. Very few people had cars, and so on and so forth. And their families thought they were going to the other end of the earth, and life was very hard for them. They went to this particular farm where they lived in their caravan, and in fact the support for them came from a family of Romany gypsies who were, as they referred to them as then, Romany gypsies, or travelers more likely, living nearby, who really helped mum and dad through their first hard winter, because they were doing manual work on the farm. And it was really hard for my mum, because she was very much a city girl, she was the first person in her neighborhood to wear the new look, that came in after the war. And she was very smart and so on and so forth. And then the next thing you know, she's in her wellies and old jeans and old jacket and chopping down wood and stuff like that. But it was, I think it was the making of them in so many ways. So that's really the start of it. And then also the fact that, I grew up, I didn't actually live on a farm, but my mother for many years did farm work. That was something you could do if you had kids. And so my early years were spent also working on farms. It was not unusual for kids to be working on farms, because that's what those long school holidays were for originally, for kids to get out and to help with the harvest and so on. So it was very much a country childhood, and it's very much about my connection to the land. And so many of the people that I grew up with that have since informed my work, for example, the ladies in the neighborhood that were, miss this and miss that, because the men, they were ladies of a certain age, and the men they would have married had been killed in the Great War. And I remember them as being very doughty, very opinionated women who were stalwarts of the community. But then onward to how that impacted me going to, when I went away to college. And, when you're raised in the country, what you want to do is, I want to go to London. And realizing it really wasn't my place. And so I think there's that, and also very much feeding into that, my parents, both of their experiences during the war. And one of the things that was on my mind, and that I absolutely understand, years ago, having read a book called War Child. I mentioned this last night in an event with Cara, and it's by a man who founded the Institute of the Study for the Study of the War Child. And Martin Parsons, in his research, he discovered that any experience of war remains in the family system for 3 generations. And what I'm sharing in the memoir is how I've seen that in my own life. So I'm not very good at doing the 5 seconds, sort of.
There's a lot of meat in there. That's the thing. And I wouldn't have left any of that out if I'd been describing it. But you said that you wanted to write about your parents for a long time. Have they snuck into Maisie Dobbs books, or is this really cathartic for you?
They have not snuck in terms of characters. I don't think anyone that I know has become a character as such. However, there are aspects of their stories. More so my dad, for example, in To Die But Once. My father, when he was he must have been 12 going on 13 when war broke out. He was 13. He was a really, really fast runner. He was a sprinter. And what they call the ARP guys, they didn't call them guys, they called them men, the air raid precautions men, and they were the men that the wardens that, for example, would patrol the districts and to make sure that people were okay during the bombings and so on. But they also needed fast runners to run messages from one depot to another. My dad was a really, really fast runner, and they came around to the schools and they took the fast runners to run messages through the bombings. And I can remember talking to I didn't know that until after I'd come to live in the States. My dad and mum were visiting, and I had some friends round, and I was telling them, my dad's a really fast runner, and I can't run up the street in a hurry. And someone said to my dad, were you a runner in the war? And my dad said, well, it's funny you should say that, but I was. And I thought, really? But also To Die But Once, that's one part of the story, and in fact that sort of more creeps into what I'm writing at the moment. But the real story that's in To Die But Once is the job that my dad had when he first started work, which was as he worked for a painting company as an apprentice, but they got a government job to paint all the airfields and decoy airfields that were being built throughout Britain, but to paint it with fire retardant. So that comes up in that. And I actually told the story about the runner, forgetting that's in the book that I'm writing at the moment. So you should gave a game away a bit, didn't I? But but I think what it is, it's a general experience that feeds into my books, a general understanding through one's family.
Yeah,
it's really a special experience to have family members, older generation, that have a contact with the war, and for a lot of people, it's very traumatic. And in my situation, my mother was born in Germany in 1942 while the bombs were falling, and there would be an air raid and everyone would run out. They might forget her in the crib. I mean, that really happened. And my father was a few years older, and he was in India during the war. And, there were several times that the Japanese bombed Calcutta because, it was against the British. That was why. And it was British country. British colony at that time. So he said that he remembered, and it was only when I was working on my book about that period that he remembered. And because I said, Dad, there were these bombs. It's like, oh yeah, we ran and we didn't have protection. The only parts of Calcutta where they had set up the guns to fire back at the aircraft were the places where the British lived and the important buildings. But the Indians didn't have that at all in the Indian neighborhoods, and they didn't know what would happen. So, I've heard about it a few different ways. It's just, we're so fortunate that we've been able to hear it, to really hear these stories and hold them, because in a few years, no one will be left. There will be no Holocaust survivors that can really say, we have to say, we heard it, and will people believe us?
Sujata, that's absolutely right.
Do your parents ever end up in your writing, in your characters?
Oh, that's good. I actually think they do, in a lot of very small, graceful ways. I have parents who've been very supportive of me having a creative career. And one of the things in this series, the Perveen Mistry series, that people are surprised about is that this young woman, Perveen's parents, they actually want her to be the first woman lawyer. And that goes against a lot of stereotypes about India. But there were parents that were progressive, and especially in the minority religions, there were people who were, these were the folks that in the beginning felt comfortable or more willing to allow their daughter to work in a public environment with men. Of course, it had to be extremely professional. And so it was like intellectual families where it happened. It also happened in Hindu families that there were early women lawyers, or not lawyers, they were doctors, a lot of people in education. So I see a little bit of that.
I actually wondered about when I read your book, when I wondered, you know, with the reflection of her relationship with her father and so on, I wondered if that was a reflection of your relationship with your parents, and that real support there. It crossed my mind.
One thing that is pretty clear in a lot of Asian countries is that your parents still choose what you want to do. So even though it looks like a progressive thing, it is a parent choice for the daughter to do that. Just like my father's career was chosen for him. He was going to go into the sciences because it was a way out, you know, it was a way out, a way up. He wanted to be a poet. So, you know, along come his daughters, and all of a sudden he's not really insisting on people following these paths, but, you know, getting to do what they love.
It really is. And I love the relationship between Perveen and her dad, and also her relationship with her mom, but her dad, who's just like such a professional role model for her, who she gets to work with. I'm jealous, you know, I was like, oh, I would love to work with my dad. My sister got to intern for him one summer. It sounds great, but I didn't get to. But so there are actually a number of audience questions. So before I turn to that though, would you each do all of these readers who already know and love you the great service of recommending something you've read recently that you really loved that they might enjoy?
Okay. Sujata, why don't you
I'll go first. I have it right here. You know, Mariah Fredericks is an author of historical fiction who's just come out a few years ago. But if you enjoy Jackie's work and my work, I think you'd really enjoy Mariah Fredericks, because she writes about early 20th century New York, and her heroine is also a working woman. She's a lady's maid in a kind of like a robber baron household, a very wealthy household, but she has a social justice background because she lived with her uncle who worked with wayward women, you know, reforming women that had come out of, you know, trafficked backgrounds. So the whole world of New York comes alive. It's multiracial, multi-religious, a lot of good women's issues. So that's who I recommend.
Well, because when I'm in the midst of writing a book, I try to keep away. Well, I keep away from fiction because I don't want to have someone else's voice in my head. So I have an awful lot of research to do around the book as well. But there's a book that I've loved, and I'm just going to reach for it here. And I'm just really enjoying it. This is actually the cover for the UK edition. It's got the same title in the US, slightly different cover. It's called Square Haunting. And it's about 5 different women who lived in the area of Mecklenburgh Square in London between the wars. Now, it's really interesting for me because Maisie Dobbs' first case took her to Mecklenburgh Square. It's an area that I've always been really fascinated by. It's not far from the Foundling Museum, which was one of the first, I suppose you could call it, orphanages for children in London, and when that part of London was just fields in the 1700s. But apart from that, these women were all really fiercely independent women who were incredibly accomplished intellectually, often got themselves into a right pickle in terms of their romantic engagements and so on. But it includes Virginia Woolf. She lived there for a while with her husband Leonard. Dorothy Sayers lived there, and Eileen Power, who was a great historian of her day. People still read her books. And and also H.D. Hilda Doolittle, who was the sort of very much a modernist and poet, and Jane Ellen Harrison, who was a classical translator. But these women were all so accomplished, and the author is Francesca Wade, and this book is just right up my alley, because it's you know, really accomplished women, really, you know, going for it, I suppose you could say, in that era. So I'm loving that, and I'm working my way through it. What I'm doing, I'm savoring it. I usually read books very, very quickly, but I'm allowing myself a bit every day, like teasing it out.
You've sold me is that I'd already heard of Mariah Fredericks. I've seen that book everywhere. I heard it's amazing. But A Square Hauntings, is that a galley that you have, or is that book?
No, it's not. No, I got as soon as it came out, I got someone to send me the UK edition, because I had to have it. Could not wait any longer. I mean, when I want a book, I want it now. And I just even feels nice. And, you know, it just reminded me of when I was working on Maisie Dobbs. I was in London at one point, and I went over to Mecklenburg Square, and I was taking photographs and walking around, just sitting in the square, because Maisie follows someone there, or follows someone from that area. And, you know, it's a very special place. And part of it was bombed during the war, so there are some modern buildings. And that's all described here. And in fact, just a little sort of piece here, that one of the more modern buildings is in where the house that Virginia Woolf used to live in. It's in that area, and it now belongs to the University of London. It's student accommodation. But the architects worked out which room would have been Virginia Woolf's study. And so the student that goes into that room every year, the new student who goes into that room, it's her dorm room. There is always a copy of A Room of One's Own sitting there on the desk ready for her. Isn't that lovely? That makes me want to cry, actually. You know, I think it's lovely. If you don't come out a writer after living in that room for a year, I don't know what's going to happen to you. You know, it's lovely.
That book was so important to me when I was in college.
Yeah. Can you imagine walking into your dorm room, and there is this book waiting for you, and you know that even though it's not the same room because it's a modern building, in this space, in this energetic space, she wrote, and they had the Hogarth press somewhere else in their property, and so brilliant. Love that story.
Now I'm going to make you ladies cry, because I'm going to ask you a really difficult audience question.
Uh-oh.
It is. Is there an element of your heroine's story that you wish you had played out differently?
I think mine's quite easily no.
Well, it's such a journey. You know, when you write a series, that's the exciting thing about it, that you're never one and done, and you've never sealed that person's fate.
Yes.
So I really like that, you know, that it at the point in which my story is, like, Perveen is sort of this purgatory of what her relationships are. She's not exactly single. She's not exactly married. And we don't know. I don't even quite know what will happen. So I like that. So I wouldn't say I have regret, but I know there are a lot of untied bows.
Did anything surprise you, Sujata, as you were going? Like that you thought the story was going to go in one direction, but you learned something completely different about Perveen?
That often happens when I'm thinking about the actual murder and the person who committed the murder, and all of a sudden something very interesting and different comes up for me. And I love that, because then I feel like I really am in a mystery. So I would say not her, but all the other people, like somebody really shows a side of themselves, or some little bit of hidden history that helps me so much.
I think one of the Sujata sort of spoke to this. One of the great things about, I think, writing a series, it's more like getting to know someone in a very real situation. So, for example, if you've just met someone, you don't suddenly know everything about them. you perhaps meet someone, you think, oh, this is a nice person, I'd like to get to know them, so you meet for coffee or whatever, socially distanced coffee, but you reveal yourself to each other over time.
Then.
Sorry, there's someone else talking here. You reveal yourself to each other over a period of time, and I think that's what happens with a series. As much as I create a character, so she reveals herself to me, and certain events happen in that character's life. And as Sujata said, I mean, it's not the end of the story. I mean, you can tie up some ends here and there that maybe you didn't want to tie up earlier. You can explore an experience here that maybe you didn't want to reveal earlier on. There were things that I knew about Maisie Dobbs that I didn't want to reveal early on. So I revealed them at a time when it felt organic to me. But I think that's why writing a series offers so much to a writer, because it's this wonderful a series of relationships, really, because there's not just the main protagonist, there's all the other characters. And you can explore their lives as you go along, but you're doing it against the backdrop with a mystery series of a mystery, and that is that archetypal journey through chaos to resolution. But it doesn't have to be for the main character, because let's see what happens next. And I find that a very rich experience as a writer.
I think you're both so good at finding historical details that end up having to affect the crime itself, because some facet of either social relationships or an atmospheric factor comes to play on it. And I think, really, really good historical fiction is hard to write, and you both do it such an amazing job. Okay, the next question we have from the audience is, if you were to start a new series, where and when would you set it?
Right. Well, that's a tricky one for me to answer, because I am actually noodling around with a new series, and I don't want to say anything about it at the moment, because there's something I read years ago, that if as a writer you talk about your work, it takes away your need to write it. And let's just say it's I'm going to be in the same era, roughly, post, let's just say post-war, but it's not going to be in the UK. There, that's and as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I'm going to say about that.
What about you, Sujata? Please tell me you want to write Perveen Mistry forever. So this is just a fantasy scenario.
I actually do. I mean, I feel like there's so many things that happened in Indian history could I take Perveen up through independence? She'll be in her 40s then. What does that look like? There's these changes in the 30s. I'm really interested, but I'm also interested in television and film. So that might be something that I get involved in later. Just different kinds of things. Also, when the most important and joyful time for me as a reader was when I was a child, probably between the time I was 11 and maybe 13. And just sort of that, I guess, what do you call that, like a middle-age reader, it just changed my life, the kind of material that was available. And, maybe that's something I'll be ready to do when I'm a grandma.
Yeah.
Another question for both authors kind of builds off the last one. When you start writing a new series, or when you each started these series, did you have any idea of how many books you would write about that character? I remember J.K. Rowling supposedly had mapped out all 7 books in every tiny detail from the beginning.
Oh, she did it on one train journey from London to Glasgow, or Glasgow to London. Or Edinburgh. Eight Harry Potters came to her, and I thought, well, I got one Maisie Dobbs. That's great. Well, from my perspective, what happened? It was really funny, because I had this one story in my head, and I thought I only had one story in my head. I didn't even think of a series, so I wrote my story. But what I found was that as I was writing it, there were various scenes and ideas that were, I was thinking, you know what, no, that doesn't fit. but because I'm a pack rat anyway, I didn't throw anything away. I might pull out a page, but I put it in a file marked fragments. And, you know, I'd be writing, no, that doesn't fit, stick it in the file marked fragments, and so on. And then what happened was that my first editor was Laura Rushka of Soho, one of the founders of Soho Press. Wonderful, wonderful person. And when Maisie Dobbs went into production, she phoned me and said, well, everything's in production now, so let's start talking about the next book. And I thought, the next book? And she said, what sort of ideas do you have in mind? And I said, well, you know, there's someone at the door. And I made some excuse to get off the phone. And I said, I'll send you some information tomorrow. And I put down, I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And because I didn't know, I had no idea. So I literally went to my fragments file. I printed out every single paragraph. I laid them all over the floor, started moving them around. And, you know, after a few hours, I realized I had the seed, just the seed, for about another 6 books at that stage. I thought, oh my gosh, I've got a series. And ever since then, I have never thrown anything out. I just put it in my fragments file just in case. So that's my story. I had no idea I was writing a series, and then I was. So.
What about you, Sujata?
Well, this back to my first series was the Jacqueline Winspear. I was just so thrilled to have completed one book that I didn't really think about a second book, but I knew that it was a really smart thing to do while you were waiting for your book to sell. So that just to keep yourself busy, and then the editor, they just might want another one. And so that did happen, that I had a 2-book deal. And so I feel like the thing that I like doing is I like to be able to write a short summary of the next book I'm going to write. And the truth is, I may not, I know just these perimeters of it, and it's sort of like almost like a little piece of marketing. Juliet, you see this all the time, and it's not fleshed out, but it's just like a general kind of idea, and that's actually not very difficult for me to do. And so often that next book idea comes together in a week or 2 weeks. Strange. It just kind of like lands.
Okay, we are running almost out of time. I do want to say that there's an amazing stream of comments in the chat if you haven't had time to read them, especially both authors for their stuff for each of you here. It's wonderful. Thank you everyone who attended. This is just fantastic. Including one person whose daughter works at an independent bookstore called Firestone in Asheville, North Carolina, Jen. Jen reminds us that we should be supporting our independent bookstores. So if you want to buy any of the books that you heard about tonight, do please consider supporting your local indie. Or if you don't have a local indie, consider supporting Jen's local indie where her daughter works, Firestorm in Asheville. And also, for everyone who attended today, I want to invite you to come on, 6 p.m. on Wednesday, June 10th. We have Kara Black in conversation with Jim Benn. So 2 more Soho alums who are going to be forced to interlocute with each other, and it's going to be just as much fun as tonight. But ladies, before you go, this is the most important question we've received all night. It's incredibly controversial. Lightning round. Which goes on first, the clotted cream or the jam?
Well, it really depends how you like it, in my estimation, but it's very hard to get jam on top of clotted cream. So I actually personally, I like to put a big dollop of strawberry jam, ideally homemade strawberry jam. And if anyone reads my memoir, they will find out why I don't like jam out of factory made jam. And I have very personal experience in that regard. So I like my dollop of, cut the scone in half, put my dollop of jam on each half, and then I like a big dollop of a note that very British measure, the dollop. A dollop of clotted cream on top. However, if I don't have cream, then I just put a little bit of butter on the scone, and then I put my strawberry jam on top of that.
Oh, the nuances, Jackie.
But I think, frankly, I think it's such a delicious thing. You just do it however you like. I have known people who put a dollop of clotted cream on, then a dollop of jam, and then another dollop of clotted cream.
Well, that's just, I mean, also
That's just indulgence. That's cardiac arrest waiting to happen. And,
I'm feeling very, very lucky because I actually have fresh strawberries in my kitchen today.
Oh, well, then make jam.
I could do that. I could do that tomorrow. I could actually have scones for breakfast tomorrow. But I guess what I would say about those two is I kind of swirl them together with my knife. I sort of
you play with your food.
Yeah, I play with it. I like them so mixed, and that way it doesn't fall off. And that's what I do.
Well, folks, it looks like we're going to be ending on a note of controversy. So, come to Soho and get excitement. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yes, thank you very much.
Have a good day, and I hope that the rest of your stay at home is just filled with good books and friends and things to eat.
Yeah, and stay safe, everybody. Stay safe. Wear the mask. Wear the mask. That's the key. Thank you very much. Really, really had a great time. Thank you, Sujata. Thank you. Thank you, Juliet. It's great.
This way. Next time it'll be in person.
It will. It'll be terrific.
I can't wait.
Okay.
Julia, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet, for everything.
Many people saying goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. So is this where I have to hit the red button? Or
Sure, yeah.
I didn't know whether that's the point. It's all such a big deal. Okay, thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
thank
everyone,
you,
for joining.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So for everyone who's left, you'll be getting a note about more author events like this soon in your inbox. The Getaway newsletter features your favorite mystery and thrillers every week. And we'll be having more events like this throughout the summer. So keep an eye out, and we will see you all soon. Thanks for everyone for joining.
Okay.